Hey everybody, it's Marvina. I wanted to welcome you to my mini angel Q&A today. So the question that I had today was about Halloween and how some of the different customs got started, like trick-or-treating and like doing seances and just all of the different fun things that we like to do in at that time of year. So one of the things that we just want to realize is that our ancestors, no matter where they came from in the world, that a lot of times they had a lot of superstition. We didn't have the ability to share information with one another in order to, kind of feel like we had what we needed to survive. And this time of year, it's like everybody knew that winter was coming. And one of the big concerns with these superstitious people is, are we going to have what we need to live through the year? Are we going to cease to exist? I mean, they had just so many, things going through their mind, and not enough education to really, strategize and think things through. And they didn't have the ability to share information with others and to kind of get a feeling for the weather patterns. Is it going to be a heavy winter or a light winter? And so intuitively, they started to kind of notice things on their own. And every year at this time of year, they would start to look for signs and symbols of how the winter was going to fare, how the crops were going to behave, and their opportunities to maybe live through the winter, and what was things going to look like. We had a lot of times we might have some of the druids, and they actually did have an ability to understand the planetary influences, the astrological influences, and we got a lot of information from them. And then we also have the wise men and the wise women of the different villages that could help us to interpret the signs and the symbols. And so there was a lot of times this time of year, everybody's like, okay, let's get together and let's throw the bones or throw the cards or do whatever sort of divination that they felt was appropriate and they felt would give them the information that they wanted to do. Our ancestors, the people that had gone on before us, that was a particular worry for them. And they were very fearful, they were very superstitious, and they just had it in their mind that if their ancestors were not at peace on the other side, then they could wreak havoc in their life and they could keep them from being healthy and keep them from being able to prosper and to succeed. And sometimes there's some truth to that. So if you did have an ancestor or a loved one who might have been unstable in this lifetime, or maybe they crossed over in a really tragic way, or they weren't at peace with the way that they died, or maybe they weren't at peace with your relationship with them or the way things happened when they were alive, then there are times where they can, um, come back into your life and bother you to the extent that you can't have peace and you can't relax and you can't sleep, and therefore it's really hard to be successful if you're having entities that are attaching themselves to you and wreaking havoc in your life. But back then, they a lot of times they would get together with the wise woman of the village, someone that maybe was just very kind of had one foot in both worlds. that's what I do. I have one foot in the living and I have one foot in the spirit world, and we sort of meet in the middle as I relay messages from your ancestors. But they would sit in circles, much like we still do to this day, in a seance to kind of have a little powwow with their ancestors and just get a feel if they if there's something that they might need to share with them that will help them to survive the winter and to prosper and to be healthy, or to just have the wisdom to guide their families, then they would do that. They would sit in seances and they would ask the spirits to be present and to bring them messages and bring them any strategy or tips or tools that would help them to get through the winter, to survive. I really think that that all of these traditions and customs, a lot of times they were driven by survival rather than thrive. But that was one thing that they would do, is have these seances. And other things that they like to do, they the veil between the worlds just naturally thins around the end of October, going into early November with All Souls Day and All Saints Day. And that's why they call it Halloween. Is it started out as All Hallows Eve, and it's a precursor to Holy. And so the next days are this All Saint Day and All Souls Days. And so October 31st was All Hallows Eve. And so it's like it's kind of like a tipping point where the veil begins to thin, and it's just energy wise, it is a perfect time to dialogue with those on the other side of the veil. And that's why we call it All Hallows Eve or Halloween, is because it is the evening before All Saints Day. And anyhow, the villagers, our ancestors, they were afraid that all of these spirits that were kind of peeking beyond the veil would take up residence in their houses, and they didn't want them to do that. Intuitively, they knew that was not a good thing, and it's not if they're not like balanced on the other side. So they would light big bonfires away from their house, because they felt like the bonfire and the light of it would attract any like entities or ancestors that were just kind of running willy-nilly through the village, and they didn't want them to come to their house. So they would light these bonfires in the center of town, and that's a way of distracting the spirits and getting them to go to the bonfire and away from them. And then they would dress up like goblins, or like what they thought their ancestors would look like on the other side. So that is where we got this idea of dressing up in the sheets and with like looking like a ghost, like something that we would think a ghost would look like, a goblin or a ghost. And they did that because they thought that their ancestors would just think that they're another spirit, that it's not someone in the living, it is someone that's in the spirit world. So they wanted to like fool them. If they did cross their path, they're like, well, we don't want you to know that we're living, so we want to look like we're a spirit as well. And so anyhow, that was one of the reasons that we started to dress up like goblins, and or dress up in a costume. Another thing that they like to do that time of year, they love to do different types of divination. And often their questions were, Who am I going to marry? Am I going to get married? How many children will I have? Will my farm survive and thrive? How old will I live? Those types of things. And one of the ways that they like to divine the name of a particular like possible romance is that they would peel an apple, and their goal is to peel the apple in one fell swoop, and so that you have this long apple core or peeled apple, and then you would throw it over your right shoulder and it would fall down, and whatever letter that it looked like, then that was supposedly going to be the first letter in your future spouse's name. Another thing that they would use for divination is they would use a needle and a thread, and usually the elder matriarch of the family would hold the needle and thread, and she would hold it over the hand of the daughter, the granddaughter, or whoever wanted to know about their future spouse. And she would ask the spirits to give information through the pendulum. It was a very rudimentary pendulum, but it's perfect. I mean, I've used a needle and thread before. It works just fine. In fact, my grandmother is the one that taught me to use a pendulum using a needle and thread. And so you can ask basic questions, and they would want to know, like, am I going to get married? Am I going to have children? How many kids am I going to have? That sort of thing. So those were really popular to do different types of divination. One of the more gross divination tools, or not tool, but things, rituals that they did is sometimes they would slaughter like a lamb or a calf or a chicken, and they would read the entrails of that animal. I think that's gross beyond belief, but they, it is what it is, and they were sort of limited and that was just one of the things that if they whatever formations that the guts and the entrails of the animal, whatever just struck their mind, then they would interpret that and take it as a sign that we're going to have a good winter and a prosperous year, or that we're going to be attacked, or that we're going to have a really hard winter and a lot of struggle to survive through the year. So that was one of the things that they would do. Another way that they would use the animal world to see if there was evil about is they would take an egg and hold the egg in their hand, and sometimes they would ask you to hold it over your heart, or maybe to run it across your third eye, and then they would crack the egg, and if the egg was bloody, then that was a sign that there was evil that was either attached to that person or to that house. And then they knew that they had to take some measures to get that evil out of there. They like to use the natural elements, like the element of fire. They would use herbs, and especially like dried herbs. For instance, like maybe sage and cedar in particular, but also lavender. And they would throw these into the flames of the fire, and they would use that to kind of bless the house, but also to purify the house and raise the energy so that negative entities would not be happy in their home. And that is something that I use to this day on a very regular basis. One of my favorite things to do to clear out the energy of the house is to use a smudge mixture of sage, cedar, sweetgrass, and lavender. So I like all of those components. They all kind of they they work towards different aspects, different things, but they serve to clear the energy of your house. And if there's entities, they help to lessen their ability to be happy there, or lessen their grip on your property or in your personal space as well. There are so many different ways that they use divination to kind of get some insight about how things were going to be over the next few months, and how the crops would grow the next year, and all of their life depended on those things. And so those were just some of the different ways that they the different things that they did this time of year, so that they felt like they might have a little time to prepare more if they felt like things were going to go bad. Another thing they like to do is examine the different bugs, and how, like, especially like the little woolly bugs, if their coat was like really full and woolly, then they took that as a sign that they better get ready for a hard winter. There are some of the different trees that you can look at their leaves and or their nuts, the different berries and fruit and nuts that they have. And once you cut them open, you can see some signs, like you may see the sign of a spoon, you might see the sign of a fork, you might see the sign of a knife, and they all like indicate a little bit of a different, like the spoon is like you're going to have to shovel a lot of snow. And so they all kind of say a little bit of something different, and it just gives them a little bit of like, okay, I know what I have to do now in order for me and my family to prepare ourselves for the winter ahead of us, so that our family can live. That was the big thing that I think drove all of their customs, is so that they could live in peace with their ancestors, because they wanted to honor their ancestors. And that was where they started the custom of setting a place at the table for a very revered ancestor, and providing them with something that they loved in while they were living. So they would set a feast of the dead, and they might put if your grandmother loved to have a banana pudding, or whatever sort of theme was her favorite food, or something that she really liked to drink, they would prepare that as a feast of the dead. And then they would set on their altar, they might put up there like something of hers that was special, or was just something really connected with her, like some of her sewing utensils or cooking utensils, or maybe something that she wore, or a lock of her hair, or some of her jewelry, or clothes, or something like that. And now, once we started having photography, then they would put a photograph, or even a likeness or a drawing of that special loved one, and they created an altar of the dead, so that if the ancestor did come to their house, that ancestor would realize that, hey, they are honoring me and my memory and my spirit, and it would create peace. That was the big thing, is to have peace between this side and that side, so that they alleviated the possibility that they would upset a spirit, and then create kind of an opening between the world. So they might cause them bad luck, or ill will. So anyhow, I hope that you enjoyed this presentation on Halloween customs. I think it's pretty fascinating, really, but Anyhow, if you have any questions, just post it in the comments below and I'll see what I can get about it. And you might share as well your Halloween customs, the things that you and your family like to do. And if you remember any of those from your relatives, your ancestors, the different special things that they might like to do when they were younger. So share those in the comments. I like to hear everybody's stories and their take on it. It's just a lot of fun and we learn from each other. So have a wonderful equinox and a fall season and a happy Halloween. And we'll be in touch. Thanks a lot. I'm Marvina. Bye bye.